Hi everyone, my name is Gabriela and today I will be going over chapter 6 with you all. The title is Defensive Racial Dynamics. For today's agenda, we will be going over a brief chapter introduction, the common characteristics of defense mechanisms, 10 race-related defense mechanisms, and key takeaways. So introduce you a little bit to this chapter. The author really emphasizes the importance of client and counselor relationship as the most important aspect of counseling. This will allow the client to feel comfortable disclosing and working through their personal issues during therapy. The author also describes defensiveness as an obstacle to the development of a good counseling relationship. Both the counselor and client can be defensive, creating a therapeutic gridlock and making a good relationship a little difficult. He also describes defense mechanisms as an unconscious distortion, meaning that the counselor or client might not be aware of these defense mechanisms. He focuses on 10 race-related defense mechanisms, which I will be breaking down for you all in this presentation. And lastly, he focused on the effects of race-related defense mechanisms on the relationship between minority clients and their counselors and how they're often unacknowledged. So first, there are 4 common characteristics of defense mechanisms. The first one is unconscious motivation. This is when people are unaware of their own defensiveness and the motives that underlie their defensive behavior. 2, distortion or denial of reality. This is when people are defensive. They don't realize how things are and create an idealized picture of reality for themselves. 3, reduction of emotional pain. In this case, defense mechanisms serve as a bandage to emotional pain. And 4, automatic and habitual responsiveness. This is when defensive behavior occurs automatically and in reaction to emotional pain. And now I'm going to jump into the 10 race-related defense mechanisms that were discussed in the text. These defense mechanisms can really hinder from having a good client counselor relationship. So it's really important for us to be aware of these defense mechanisms and keep an eye out so that we don't interrupt the therapeutic processes. The first one is color blindness. In this case, counselors' illusion that minority clients are no different from non-minority clients. They relate to minority clients as though race is unimportant. They tend to overlook the influence of racism and discrimination on the attitudes, feelings, behaviors, and personality development of minority clients. For example, a counselor who doesn't understand clients who come from cultures that value collectivism and group affiliation may interpret the behavior as codependency. A consequence of this is misdiagnosis. The second is color consciousness. In this situation, the counselor views all problems are stemming from the minority status, from the client's minority status. They often fail to diagnose clients. These counselors may minimize conditions and fail to provide with appropriate treatment. They place too much weight on the client's race. And they may say statements like, the reason you have an alcohol addiction is because you are Native American. 3 is cultural transference. This occurs when a minority client transfers emotional reactions to a therapist of another race. These can be positive or negative feelings. For example, before therapy, a client may have had significant interactions with other members of the therapist race and may feel some kind of resentment throughout therapy. The client's reactions have nothing to do with the therapist necessarily, but it's an opportunity for the therapist to further explore those feelings with the client. However, it's really important to note that unintentional racism may arise if the counselor is not able to deal with cultural transference. 4 is cultural countertransference. So this is when the therapist projects his or her emotional reactions into the client. This involves therapists projecting race-related emotional reactions into the client of another race. Cultural countertransference causes counselors to inappropriately assess the client. 5 is cultural ambivalence. In this defense mechanism, counselors are preoccupied with their own issues about race. Cultural ambivalence can harm clients. counselors are not attuned to their client's psychological conflicts and unresolved issues as they should be. And therapy becomes more counselor-centered rather than client-centered. 6 is pseudo-transference. So in this case, the client responds to a therapist in a matter that appears defensive, but actually is not. The client's reactions are grounded in reality. Clients may react strongly to the counselor's unhealthy attitudes and behaviors, and the counselor may misinterpret the behavior, which can lead to misdiagnosis if the patient and the therapist are unaware of this pseudo-transference. 7 is race-based misdiagnosis. So this is something the author really emphasized as well, that there's been a pattern of misdiagnosis in minority clients, particularly in African Americans. He stated that African Americans are diagnosed with schizophrenia on initial admission more than twice as often as white clients, at a rate of 65% higher than whites. The author states that this is a result of racial bias in diagnosis. So it's very important to keep our biases and these things in mind as we're working with our clients. 8 is avoidance of race. So in this defense mechanism, we can see a counselor avoiding discussions of race and culture, which may not be a good idea. Counselors should be culturally responsive and try to understand the client's culture and ethnicity. This will help the therapy process. And minority clients view culturally responsive counselors as more credible and competent, and clients are more likely to feel comfortable sharing and really taking advantage of the therapy process. 9 is over-identification. This is a key defense mechanism that minority counselors bring into play in therapy. Minority counselors often have much in common with their clients. They may come from similar backgrounds and may share similar interests and values. However, they may over-identify and may encourage excessive discussion around race issues. So over-identifying can be a result of a minority counselor's unresolved issues surrounding race. A consequence of over-identification is also misdiagnosis. And the last defense mechanism is identification with the oppressor. Minority counselors who have difficulty dealing with their own race-related pain adopt the defense of denying their minority status and identify with white people. A consequence of this is they put unrealistic expectations on minority clients and can take it too far. They might expect minority clients to make rapid therapeutic growth and penalize them for holding on to their values and customs of their racial ethnic groups. So now we're going to go over the key takeaways for this chapter. First off, as I mentioned earlier, it's very important to have a good relationship between the counselor and minority client. This will allow the client to self-disclose and work through their personal problems. Defense mechanisms can lead to misdiagnosis. As we saw, there's a pattern of these leading to misdiagnosis, and these defense mechanisms can definitely interrupt the therapy process. So it's very important to be aware of them and work through any of them. Lastly, counselors who fail to handle race-related defensiveness of minority clients have been found to perpetuate racism. So it's really important to check in with ourselves, work through our own race issues, and to be aware of these defense mechanisms that can take place unconsciously. That way we don't interrupt the therapy process for our clients. Here is my reference. And thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope everyone learned a lot. I look forward to viewing yours.